Guest tonight is Chris Emery. He is a film producer and co-founder of Free Mind Films. In 2011, Free Mind Films released A Noble Lie, Oklahoma City, 1995, a documentary exposing the lies behind the official story of the bombing of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. Chris joins the show to discuss the links between that terrorist attack, 9/11, and other domestic and foreign false flag terrorist attacks. Free Mind Films also produced State of Mind, Psychology of Control, and more recently, ShadowRing. Chris, how are you doing tonight?
Good. Thank you for having me on,
Well,
Tim. It's always an honor to be on your show.
Well, thank you for coming on. A noble lie. Well, Plato explained in his Republic that a noble lie is a myth or untruth, not only told by an elite to maintain social harmony or order. You applied that name to your documentary on Oklahoma City. Why did you choose that title for that?
Well, that was actually inspired by James Lane, our executive director, and it was very poignant. I actually was out of town when they chose the name of the film, but after they told me the reasoning, I said, "Hey, we hit it dead on." The way it applies to the film is that the official narrative of the story we found out as a film crew, being objective about the entire subject, was that it was completely false, and there were a lot of layers of subterfuge and cover up. And so the name applied perfectly, and then that's how we just started the chain of the thought process of how to put the film together.
Now, of course, the official narrative of the Oklahoma City bombing was that it was a domestic terrorist attack carried out by one Timothy McVeigh with the help of Terry Nichols on April 19th, 1995. Killed 168 people, injured about 680 others. What is wrong with that story?
From the get-go, Tim McVeigh, we found out, and we even saw his payroll records, was actually working for the CIA at the time, and had been for almost 2.5 years prior to the bombing. After the film was released, further information came our way that showed that he was actually working for a joint task force with the ATF and the FBI. And the entire case was supposed to be a setup, a sting operation, and to basically give a good light, shed good light on the ATF and the FBI, and justify their very existence. It was a setup. It went horribly wrong. And I know for some of your listeners, they're probably wondering, what in the world is he thinking? Well, I just want to let them know, with all due respect, this is 16 years of research. This information came our way as a objective third-party film crew. We didn't have any political stripe, or we weren't Republican or Democrat or Libertarian or Independent or anything. We just went right down the middle of the road on this case, and we went where the facts led us. And that's why we tried to be as respectful and objective and professional as we could in the film. We had 6.5 hours of footage. We could only mark it. In fact, we were pushing it at 2 hours and 8 seconds. We didn't think we could actually get the film out on the market, but it did very well. We were very blessed in that respect. So the short answer would be that we completely disassembled the official story and showed what, according to the facts, what we thought had happened that day. And there's still a lot of unanswered questions, and we hope to get out a director's cut, an expanded cut here in the next year or two, to show even more information that came our way after the film, and some of the stuff we simply couldn't fit on the original cut.
Now, what the public was fed with this case, the storyline they were given, was that Timothy McVeigh was an NCO, decorated, who became alienated with the U.S. government, largely motivated by the attack on the Waco compound, the Branch Davidian compound in 1993, and maybe some other incidences like the Ruby Ridge incident. And this drove him to bomb the Federal Building, with the target being the BATF office there, the primary target. I guess the others being collateral damage. What you're saying, the evidence you unearthed was that he wasn't really out of government service, to say. He basically he was plucked from the armed services by the intelligence community, for black ops or something.
Yes, exactly. And if it walks like a duck, smells like a duck, and sounds like a duck, it's a duck. Well, we went beyond that. In fact, we triple checked all of our information, and when we saw the payroll records, it's like, wow, okay, yeah, he was getting paid not only by the U.S. government but by the CIA. A lot of folks aren't aware that during the Persian Gulf War, McVeigh was actually on General Schwarzkopf's security detail. He was a gunner off of a tank, and he shot 50 cal rifles. He could take someone's head off 1,500 yards downrange. He was an expert marksman, so much so that when he was in custody and trial, before the trial in Denver, he actually had a small room that they built at the federal courthouse because they didn't want to risk him getting killed shuttling between the county jail and the courthouse. They made him a little apartment right there at the courthouse. He received 2 medals of commendation from the U.S. Army. They had to give it to him. I mean, they're required by Army code. That's how good he was. And the fact that he was on Schwarzkopf's details shows that not only was he smart, but he was very qualified to serve as an expert marksman. The best that we found out is that he was an assassin. He was a professional assassin, and he smuggled drugs for the CIA. And I mean, it is what it is. We had, like I said, we triple-checked our information. There were sources that came to us by local, county, state, and federal law enforcement in Oklahoma that said, yeah, they knew, most of these people knew that he was working on the payroll for the federal government. To take that one step further, and to just elaborate a little bit on what I mentioned earlier during the intro, he was tasked by the FBI and Larry Potts, who was number 2 at the FBI at the time, and his counterpart, Mr. Potts' counterpart at the ATF, to recruit people to blow up federal buildings in the United States. And Oklahoma City drew the short straw. The best that we saw a list of 11. Denver, Atlanta, Seattle, Fort Worth, and of course Oklahoma City was on there, Chicago. And a lot of this intel came by way of other folks we had a team of 75 people working on this film. And this intel was coming in with no return addresses. We had 2 private eyes that worked with the bombing committee, independent bombing committee. The film was based on a 572-page volume book that they wrote. And a lot of this intel was coming by way of the U.S. Marshal's Office, the security detail for the Saudi royal family in Riyadh, the RCMP, the FBI's counterpart to the FBI in Canada, in Ottawa, and the U.S. Marshal's Office out of New Jersey, Scotland Yard. It was unbelievable. This stuff was coming in from literally the 4 corners of the earth, and it was saying, yeah, he was working for the CIA. So the whole official story not only is completely false, it's a slap in the face and the kick in the groin to the victims' family members and survivors, and it's an insult to the intelligence of the people, especially the victims' family members, that the U.S. Justice Department had the temerity and the arrogance to even pander a story like that. It's absolutely disgusting. But we didn't want to take an arrogant or how do we say this? We didn't want to take a disrespectful approach to the film. We wanted, like I said, to go right down the middle of the road. And that's a result. And we were very, very blessed and actually commended by our peers, people that we didn't even know in the film community. They said, wow, not only did you do an excellent job, but we want to commend you with these awards. So I had no idea that was going to happen.
Now, pointing out Timothy McVeigh's intelligence ties is a big blow to the official story. Much the same way if you put a spotlight on like Lee Harvey Oswald.
Sure. It completely shattered the official narrative.
Yeah.
And so we're left with, okay, this thing doesn't make any sense. Where do we go? Well, we had to go where the information led us.
Mm-hmm. And what we have here, basically, Timothy McVeigh, you're saying he was a government asset and likely some sort of mind-controlled patsy for, say, forces within the U.S. government who wanted to use the event, the terrorist attack, as a pretext, maybe to pass legislation or expand the police state or kind of like fundamentally change the politics of the nation, sort of a strategy of tension.
Exactly. In fact, there were enough rules on the books. General Benton K. Parton, who was one of our expert analysts, he contributed his expertise to the film. Were very blessed to have interviewed him, and became a good friend of mine for the better part of 7 years. He said that there was enough rules on the books. We didn't have to have the omnibus bill, Anti-Terrorism and Legislation Act of 1995. It was overkill. But here again, it was just, it came around gun control. They wanted to have the boogeyman. Well, the ironic thing is the boogeyman worked for the United States government. In fact, Jesse Trenadu, who was another attorney and who's absolutely wonderful. I texted him 3 days ago. We still keep in touch. He said that anytime you have a anti-government group trying to, you have 6 out of the 7 people working in the anti-government group are working for the government, and that was just the irony. It was typical. It was the same thing with Oklahoma City.
Was it Terry Nichols, Tim McVeigh's alleged co-conspirator? Timothy McVeigh identify Larry Potts, the FBI agent, as his handler?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And actually, it was he identified Potts as McVeigh's handler, and in fact, McVeigh didn't want to have a body count. There was an honor among even assassins in this world, if you can imagine that. You don't kill children. McVeigh said that he had to have Potts asked him to go completely off script. The building was supposed to be blown up at 9 o'clock in the evening the night before. We found this out through various sources in the county and the state level. And the OSBI, which is the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation, the state version counterpart to the FBI, worked very closely with the FBI field office in Oklahoma City, and they were telling us the same thing. They knew something was going to come down a good 45 days in advance, but it got out of hand. And they were surveying the area within 10 square blocks from 9 o'clock the night before till 6 a.m. Well, then they stood down. What happens? All hell breaks loose at 2 minutes after 9 that morning of April 19th. So, but Potts basically said, we're going to have a body count. We want this, to really drive the point home that we need stricter guidelines on, anti-terrorism and gun control, the whole gamut. They wanted to throw the book at him. And McVeigh was like, no, I'm not like this. I don't do this. This is supposed to be a false flag. So that in and of itself has turned the entire story completely on its head.
And that's one way, perhaps, these conspirators within the government could, rope in the other agencies. Because once they're involved in this other plan, this bombing at 9 p.m., they can't admit that.
Right, exactly.
So the cover-up game begins.
It was horrible. In fact, there was more money. God. The last count we had was there was $58 million on the prosecution side of the case to lead up to the McVeigh trial, which happened it started in May of 2001 and finished 3.5 weeks later. It should have stretched out for 4 months. Mm-hmm. Actually, excuse me, not 2001. Let's go back 4 years. 1997. And McVeigh was executed in May of 2001. Get my dates turned around here. But the crazy thing was there was more money spent covering it up and throwing everything at this case to show, to support the official narrative, which was really just very sad and very tragic. We just saw all this intel, and I thought, God, if they would have just done the right job, and of course, I don't want to get off on a tangent here, but they could have prevented 9/11. But that's a whole other story for another interview. But more money spent covering it up than actually prosecuting it the way it should, and it was selective prosecution. To this day, and I'll just I'm going to put this out there. 2 of our lead investigators and I had talked and asked on several radio interviews over the years, even before the movie was released, do we think McVeigh is dead? And I unequivocally say no. I don't think he's dead. And the main reason is when you work for the CIA, you don't recruit assets and kill them off and expect to recruit more assets. You talk about that line drying up really quick. So what you do is just, he goes into witness protection program. It changes his identity. They're the CIA. They can do that. They're professionals. So I still think he's alive somewhere.
Well, they've never produced even the routine
There's no body
confirmation. Right. Yeah, I mean, there was no autopsy done, right? And the body was supposedly cremated, correct?
Well, it was a death record.
Yeah.
No autopsy. And even on his death record, he said he was employed by the U.S. military. Really? Seriously? That was another big red flag that just waved in front of us. So.
Well, the only confirmation of his death are the claims by the federal government. So
right.
take that for what it's worth.
The death chamber at Terre Haute, Indiana, at the federal lockup there, had 3 hearses pulling out the back door of the death chamber to throw off the media. Mm. And I know for a fact, and this is by way of James Nichols, who I befriended for almost, close to 9 months. We kept in touch on a regular basis. And he knew of the movie coming out, and he knew his brother was framed. Terry shouldn't be in federal lockup. But McVeigh's dad tried to sue for the body, and the federal government told him to go take a flying leap, and they produced an urn of ashes. Well, how the heck did they know? Or how did he know that that was Timmy's ashes? So just complete disrespect even to the immediate family.
Well, like I said, the idea of giving someone a false identity or a legend, which is part of intelligence tradecraft, it's called sheep dipping.
Right.
And it's, I think Colonel Fletcher Prouty described it in his book, Secret Team. It's rather routine within the community for agents, who want to take on, false personas or different identities for any number of reasons. But I think he described it as such that it's an intricate army-devised process by which a man who is in the service as a full career soldier or officer agrees to go through all the legal and official motions of resigning from the service. Then rather than actually being released, his records are pulled from the Army personnel files and transferred to a special Army intelligence file. Substitute but nonetheless real appearing records are then processed and the man leaves the service. He is encouraged to write to friends and give a cover reason why he got out. He goes to the bank and charge card services and changes his status to civilian. He does the hundreds of other official personal things that any man would do if he really had gotten out of the service. Meanwhile, his Army records are kept in secrecy but not forgotten. The main point is they have the resources, the ability to make all the paperwork necessary, all the changes necessary to allow a man to assume a different identity and go other side of the world and live his life as somebody else. It's not that difficult.
Exactly, and the last reason, and the best count that we had, according to our sources, was that McVeigh had 7 different driver's licenses, 7 different names. How do you do that if you don't work for the U.S. government in some capacity?
It's again very very similar to Lee Harvey Oswald.
Right.
Yeah. So
there's a lot of parallels there.
Yeah.
One thing, and just to expand on that. After the film was released, in fact, Jesse Trinidad put us in touch with the nephew of the former governor of Utah. Jesse's a copyright and civil lawyer, law lawyer in downtown Salt Lake City. He works out of the federal court, across the federal courthouse. And this nephew reached out to him and said, "Look, I've got the information on the bombing." He said, McVeigh approached me in February of 95. And remember, the bombing happened in April. So we rewind the tape 2 months. And he said he came to him under one of the aliases we found out. One of them was used of Tim Tuttle. And he kept after him, phone calls and knocking on his door. And finally, this gentleman, Johnny Bangerter, and Governor Bangerter got on Wikipedia. And sure enough, he was a governor in the early 70s. They have an expressway named after his uncle that circles the entire Salt Lake City metroplex. And here we are doing our first film premiere at a theater up in Salt Lake City, and we invited Jesse there for Q&A afterwards. And we're going down the expressway, and there it is, Bangerter Expressway. I'm thinking, wow, this is crazy. It's Johnny's uncle's. So anyway, Johnny was approached, and McVeigh wanted him to, hold on one second. Excuse me there. He wanted him to blow up a federal building in Denver. And Johnny said, look, you've lost your mind. There's no way I'm going to do this. They had him over the barrel on manufacturing certain semi-automatic gun parts. They wanted him to basically, roll the dice and take a chance on that, and then it would have thrown him in jail if things went upside down. And Bangerter says no. So McVeigh went on to somebody else. Well, lo and behold, we found out that's when he was working for the FBI and the ATF. And if any of your listeners have an issue with that, I think that I'm anti-government. I'm not. I'm a filmmaker. I love this country. I have, in fact, the flip side of that, right now, I'm going to qualify this interview right now, is that we had more good people from the government on the local, county, state, and federal level come to us to help us with this film because they wanted it to come out. Then we had some that didn't want it. So I have the utmost respect for the good people that work for the United States government. And if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have been able to get this film out. So let's just get that out right now. And, like I said, filmmakers, we go right down the middle of the road. We have to go with where the facts lead us. And this is the product of that.
Yeah, these agencies and governments aren't monolithic. And, of course, the only problem is the further you get up the chain of command, the more corrupt it gets. Mm-hmm. But definitely at the local level, you're more likely to find people of goodwill and honesty than you are as you move up the chain of command, I guess.
exactly.
But one thing that's interesting, you mentioned Jesse Trentadue. He was the lawyer who was investigating the death of his brother Kenneth Trentadue, who died in federal custody. You want to get into that case a little bit, and maybe how he unearthed PatCon? It might tell us the motivation here behind this.
Yeah, PatCon is Patriot Conspiracy was the acronym. Hold on one second, I'll be right back.
Mhm.
I apologize, I'm getting over a little bit of a cough here, so
am I.
Yeah, need to mute the line there.
Yeah.
Jesse's brother, Kenny, was brought through the, not a lot of folks are aware of this, Oklahoma City is almost the geographic center of the country. And they have basically Air Con there, or Conair, excuse me, which is the huge U.S. Bureau of Prison transfer facility, which is adjacent to World Rogers International Airport. Big facility. We were able to, a little bit of clandestine work, get a shot of the front gate of that for our film, and we had about a 4 or 5 second clip. But it's Jesse's brother was on probation at the time, and he failed to report to his parole officer because his brother wanted to drink beer, and that was against his probation. He robbed some banks, did his time, got out, but he was coming across the border from Mexico into the United States, and this was within weeks. Or excuse me, all right, so you go April 1995, go to August 20 of 95. So we're looking at almost 3 months to the day, 4 months to the day. He's brought across the border, had the similar pickup truck, same year, served in the same Marine detachment, a dragon tattoo on his left forearm, as Richard Lee Guthrie, who was also an accomplice of McVeigh in the bombing. It was just a bad case of mistaken identity, wrong place, wrong time. He was brought into custody, and then they brought him in under his alias that he had used when he was taking down banks in California. So they transferred him to Oklahoma City. He's there for 2 days, and we found out through sources at the Bureau of Prison and the Oklahoma City Police Department that Kenny was tortured and murdered at the Bureau of Prison facility. It was horrendous. And there were 3 FBI agents in full body armor that just beat the living daylights out of him, strangled him with zip cords, and there's ligature marks on his throat. They cut his throat. They beat his heels. And then we go into detail on that, and we did it in a respectful and professional way. But people have to understand that the extremes that the federal authorities went to make sure that they thought he was Richard Lee Guthrie. They wanted him dead because they didn't want the expanded version of the official narrative coming out. He was killed for information he didn't have. And it was Jesse that actually sued the federal government, the Bureau of Prisons, and they were awarded $1.1 million. So if there's not any merit to his case, why was the federal government obligated? And they paid them $1.1 million for mental anguish. And in fact, one of the guys that helped us with the film golfed with the federal judge, Tim Leonard, who actually presided over that case. Unbelievable chain of events. So Jesse befriended us, and we helped him out. He gave us information and intel and photos that we were able to scan and use in the film. And like I said, to this day, he's still, he's like family to us. We were in there. We cried together. We laughed together. We had broke bread together. We had lunch together. Unbelievable. So, the folks have to get the film to really understand the context of what happened. And to this day, the federal government will not fess up and tell Jesse that they killed his brother by mistake. Even if it was mistaken identity, they refused to do that. But we know it was, and there was no way he committed suicide. So much so that the state medical examiner, Fred Jordan at the time, would not sign off on the fact that it was a suicide. He said it was an unsolved homicide.
And now, in the course of that investigation, he uncovered an operation called PatCon, Patriot Conspiracy.
That's correct. And there was a gentleman that came forward. In fact, we had our premiere in Salt Lake City in March of, I'll never forget this, March of 2012. And we had lunch not far from his office. And he told us about PatCon. It was a gentleman that was actually former Army Ranger, served in Vietnam, and after Vietnam he had was trainer in Special Forces, and he was asked to go on a special detachment, Browns Ferry Nuclear Power Plant, and I believe it's in Alabama. Um, it was it was an old Civil War outpost on this big ferry, a key military positioning on the north part of this lake for the Union Army. That's where it was called Brown's Ferry, and they had a big nuclear power plant there to serve most of Alabama and Tennessee and Arkansas and so forth. And this group, led by this former Army Ranger, was to level the entire plant, kill 49 people. And within 2 days before this is supposed to go off, he says, not only no, but hell no. He says, I didn't join the Special Forces to do this. He says, I'm dying of cancer from Agent Orange. It was just soaked into me throughout my days in the Vietnam War. He says, I'm not going to go to my deathbed having this on my conscience. He says, I'm going to tell the truth. So he called up Jesse, and he told him the whole thing. He says, yeah, I work for PATCON. And he did look at the videotape that we were given by the Oklahoma County Sheriff's Department. They shot video the morning of the bombing. He looked at the license plates that were being documented in this video. And he says, yeah, most of those, he says he recognizes most of those license plates. He recognizes some of the people in the films. He says, those are the people. If a PATCON operation was to be planned and set out in motion, if they were given a green light, he says, those are the people that would show up to do it. He says, he didn't know for sure if Oklahoma City was PATCON, but he says all the earmarks were there. The personnel were on the boots on the ground. The vehicles were there with the license plates. There was codes that he recognized. He said all the pieces of the puzzle were there. But it was the Browns Ferry nuclear power plant that it was supposed to go down in, I believe, 1992. And they yanked it at the last minute. These guys had duffel bags full of cash. They were paid cash to do it, and they just left it on the table. They said, forget it. We don't want to be a part of this. This is disgusting. We're not killing innocent civilians. So that was but it went back way beyond. It was back in I believe the late 70s where the U.S. government started this. And, all right, let me just break this down in the simplest of terms. To the best of our perspective now as filmmakers, what we were told, and we just saw this time and time and time again, the intel that was coming across our desk or through emails or, at face-to-face breakfasts or dinners or lunches at Denny's or whatever. In order for most of the federal agencies to exist, they have to justify their existence by certain, how many bank robberies they're going to solve, how many, alleged terrorist attacks are they going to solve. Well, they don't happen that often. So what are these guys doing? Most of them, the higher-ups now, not the rank and file, not the secretaries, not the janitors, but the higher-ups are making these cases up out of thin air. They're creating them out of thin air. And that was the genesis of PATCON. It's unbelievable. I mean, it took us about 3 or 4 weeks to wrap our mind around this. And once we understood it, then we said, okay, we don't agree with it, but we understand the psyche behind it, and that made our job a lot easier as filmmakers to present this information in a more objective way. It's a parallel life. I don't know how else to describe it. These guys that get up in the morning, men and women, and this is what they do. This is what they're trained to do, and they have no conscience. There is no respect for the sanctity of human life if you can let this go on.
That motivation, I think more people have an understanding of that now. 14 years into the war on terror, we have Trevor Aronson's book, The Terror Factor. In that regard, that's about the FBI and how it maintains a stable of informants that go out and stir up terrorist cases in order to justify the Bureau's budget,
right?
Counterterrorism budget. So more people are aware of that. I guess you're saying this dates back as early as the late 70s.
Well, what it is, it's basically an extension of what we found out from the OSS and a lot of the tactics that were learned and gleaned from the special forces, the Nazis that were brought over after World War II. And it was the genesis of the CIA. So the Red Army in Italy during the 1940s. They basically certain cases and certain techniques and training and so forth and mind control for the agents themselves were cherry picked from what worked best in the alleged communist bloc countries in Europe.
And of course, what we know now in Europe with the Gladio, Operation Gladio.
Oh God, it was horrendous.
NATO and the idea of using residual fascist elements, working with I guess these Masonic lodges. The P2 Lodge, I think, was one. Working with NATO intelligence to carry out these bombings and attacks throughout Europe, particularly Italy, yeah.
To put this in context, and we had so much coming at us. I mean, it was like trying to drink out of a fire hose. It was unbelievable. So we really had to step back and say, okay, we could present all this in the movie, but people would think I'm not being flippant here, but they thought we'd been smoking crack. It's like,
Yeah.
where are you coming up with this stuff? So you really have to take it, in first you crawl, then you walk, then you run. And it was a challenge. I mean, this stuff was powerful. It not only was it true, it was well documented, but you had to establish a storyline and show the people, okay, where are we going to start? All right, let's just present the official narrative and show why it's completely false. And then we go ahead and build up in a completely different storyline that's based on fact. We were never sued, and listeners may not be aware of this. Not one motion of litigation was served against us. And it was a double-edged sword. And I'll tell you why. Because the federal authorities didn't want us to have a day in court. We would have kicked them around the courtroom like a soccer ball, so to speak. And they didn't want to give us any publicity on this film. So they kept their mouth shut. Well, we didn't lose any sleep over it because they say, all right, you want to take us to court? Come on, you want to dance? We'll meet you in courtroom. And there was no way in hell that they wanted that to happen. Because 92%, we went through, actually almost 95% of our documentation that the film is based on is from Justice Department documents and from the trial records. So there's no way that they wanted that to come out. It would have been a complete humiliation on their part. And that wasn't our objective. But that was always a challenge that was out there. It was a gentleman's agreement not to rub it in their face. But if they wanted to challenge us, our entertainment lawyers, and we had 3 lawyers, attorneys in Oklahoma City that were actually going to do pro bono for us, says, all right, we'll show up. It never came to be, never came to pass. And then that's when we started getting the awards. So it went from the possible threat of litigation to entering this thing in the film festivals and then having our peers look at it and say, wow, where did this come from? And we didn't expect that at all. We were very blessed, and it just came. Because when the truth comes out, you do good and good follows. And it's been the case with all 3 of our films. Sorry to get off on a tangent there.
Oh, no. That's perfectly fine and perfectly it's relevant to what we're talking about here. But the way PatCon works is, and if people are saying, well, what's going on here? Says, well, the one way was they infiltrate these organizations. Mm-hmm. And have assets, and what they do is they agitate and get them to do things, and also at the same time also fund them. This might explain the drug smuggling element to it, because that's the source of black budget operations.
Right, completely off the books.
Off the books, yeah.
Yes, exactly.
That's why Timothy McVeigh would be a drug smuggler / assassin. It's all part of the same deal. That's how with gun running and assassins and drugs, that's how you fund the operations. But that's why someone like Richard Lee Guthrie would be involved. And he was a member of this group, which would be sort of recruited by the FBI to carry out some of these actions. They're unwitting or witting assets.
Right, exactly. And
a
lot of these guys that were brought in, Guthrie, it was a Michael. Not 48 was
Michael 48. Yeah.
Yeah. He did his time. He rolled, narked on his buddies, and he's in witness protection now. He did, I think, 7 years out of 8.5 for 9-year sentence that he was given, and God only knows where he is. There was another guy out of Philadelphia, and the name's on the tip of my tongue here. I tell you, one time, gosh, we had 15, 16 guys that we could just rattle off. Odd thing is that he took down a bank about 4 miles from where I used to live in Madison, Wisconsin, at a shopping mall not far from where I lived. And it had changed hands a couple of times after that happened, but I went back and talked to the bank manager, and he said, yeah, they were there when that robbery happened. Ended up, he was given a passport and tens of thousands of dollars of cash and set up for a life in Canada. And he was, in fact, here's another piece we couldn't include in the film. It was we talked to McVeigh's former girlfriend. She lived up in Kansas, and actually her girlfriend dated this other guy that robbed the bank in Madison. He took down, he took down 8 banks in the matter of 9 months after the bombing, and they finally caught up with him at his house on New Year's Eve, I believe, in 1998. And then they put him on trial, and then they figured out, wow, this guy knows way too much. And his dad was a battalion chief for fire department in Philadelphia. So he had a lot of connections in Philly. Uh, but anyway, that's, we thought he was part of the PatCon deal. We never could really put our finger on it. But the whole point of the trial was a selective prosecution. There's no way that the prosecution wanted any of the exposure on the special operations that they had control over, and they certainly didn't want any exposure on the special ops that they had no control over, which was the gray area between the Justice Department and the CIA. And then we found out that there's something even more nefarious and more insidious than the CIA. There's no way in hell we were going to open those doors, but we know it exists. So that's why there was that selective prosecution. That's why they only went to McVeigh and Nichols. Can you imagine the three-ring circus that would have happened if these other people were brought in? Oh my God, heads would have rolled. I mean, all the way from the top echelon of these agencies. Mm-hmm. So what they do, they settle for an assassin and a drug smuggler for the CIA. It was, okay, I just wrap this thing up, turn the lights off, shut the door and walk down the hallway and be done with it. And it's still out there. There's a lot of truth out there.
Of course, with Timothy McVeigh, you have the specter of mind control involved in this. Mm-hmm. Part of that is his own claim of having a chip implanted in his body. Mm-hmm. And his link to Dr. Jolyon West, who has ties to MK Ultra.
Right.
And of course, Dr. Jolyon West was also treated Sirhan Sirhan, the alleged assassin of Robert Kennedy.
Right.
Jack Ruby, who shot Lee Harvey Oswald, the alleged assassin of John F. Kennedy. And links to Patty Hearst. And Patty Hearst, because that's the Symbionese Liberation Army. Mm-hmm. And that goes back to Donald DeFreeze, who is this guy, Sin-K, a.k.a. Sin-K. He was a police informant, and he was supposedly handled by one Colton Westbrook at the Vacaville prison, which was involved in MK Ultra operations.
Right.
And this opens the whole can of worms of COINTELPRO and all these, these basically a lot of the disturbances and violence we've seen in the 70s, 60s, 70s, and since then is actually our black operations carried out by the very authorities we entrust to prevent them.
Exactly. It's the irony is, it's really insidious, and like I said, it will take you several weeks to get your mind wrapped around it. But you explained it very concise. Mm-hmm. What we found out about Jolyon West, that he actually worked at the University of Oklahoma in Norman, which is about 22 miles south of Oklahoma City. If you draw a line from Dallas-Fort Worth to Oklahoma City, it's 3.5-hour drive, due north on I-35. Norman is about 20 minutes south of Oklahoma City. He was doing experiments with an elephant on LSD.
Oh, yeah.
And he killed it, and he got fired. Where did he go? To UCLA. So he was a tenured professor there. He got so far out of hand at UCLA, they ran him out of town on the rails. Where did he go? He worked for the federal government. So he shows back up. Oddly enough, it was we found out Al Gore asked Jolyon West to go to Oklahoma City to help out the victims' family members and survivors. It's like, no, that would be the last person that I would select to try to console the families or have any rhyme or reason on what happened. He went there to make sure that certain key members, outspoken members of the victims' family members group that were asking questions, pretty much towed the line and, were convinced to believe the official narrative. And yeah, he was actually, there's a federal prison in El Reno, about 32 miles due east of Oklahoma City. A lot of white-collar criminals are out there. Not so much, in fact, McVeigh was kind of an anomaly. He was out there just for protective custody at the time. And lo and behold, who shows up at the probable cause hearing that they had at the prison? Jolyon West. This guy is the freaking Prince of Darkness. When he shows up, something horribly wrong is going to happen. And whether it's behind the scenes, overt or covert, you don't even want him in the same county, let alone the same prison. And there were hypodermic needles on McVeigh's food tray. We got this by way of a trustee that was sweeping the floors, and he said that the prison warden hit the roof. Well, the prison warden sent up to a BOP site up in Alaska 2 weeks later, told to shut up. And McVeigh was higher than a kite at the probable cause hearing. He would have, admitted to assassinating Abraham Lincoln. I mean, he was complete. In fact, the defense counsel was they hit the roof. And then when they noticed Jolyon West was there, they just kept their mouth shut. They says, that's it. This thing is completely upside down. It's going backwards from day one.
Well, again, that might explain some of the antics or the some of the things observed at the trial of the alleged Boston bomber.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's this is textbook CIA. In fact, I went ahead and presented this information at a conference that was at in Chicago in 2006, and had two female. I knew they were Air Force intelligence. They came up to me afterwards and they said, "You did a great job on your presentation." They said, "Just be careful," and they walked away. I wasn't scared, but I knew that I hit their number. I got their marker.
Yeah,
and. This is and I wasn't being arrogant. You have to, believe me on this. It's like, look, there's a fine line between being arrogant and being confident. But we knew what we were talking about because this information was presented to us plain as day by people that worked in the intelligence community that simply couldn't come out and present it. They had their pensions on the line. Their colleagues knew where their kids went to school. They knew where their wives went to school or to church or whatever, or to work or, whatever the case may be. But this was funneled to us. And, as an independent film crew, it's like, wow. It really kind of blew our mind for a while. And then we says, okay, for grace of God or whatever, or higher being or whatever God that you believe in, you do good, and you're going to have the strength and the ability and the resources to forge ahead. And that's exactly what we found out about Charlie and West. This guy was in complete head case.
Another interesting character involved in this case is Andre Strassmeyer.
Mm-hmm.
You want to get into his involvement in this case and what that might tell us?
Well, here again, another connection to Al Gore, vice president at the time. Al Gore was working with the Helmut Kohl administration, and the number 3 at the Helmut Kohl administration was Strassmeyer's dad. Kind of I would say, our counterpart to an assistant to Dick Cheney. Strassmeyer's dad was assistant to their defense counsel or defense secretary over there. And Gore's whole objective of having Strassmeyer brought over here, by the way, who was a washout with special forces, for the German special forces, but since his dad was higher up, he was kind of, he's kind of a hangers-on type of thing. He was brought over here under the auspices of working for German special forces to infiltrate the neo-Nazi groups in the United States. And Gore, to try to gain some political hay with the German government, and said, sure, bring him on over. Well, this is a guy that was in the United States for over 4.5 years without gainful employment, with a credit card. Somebody was paying his credit card bills and his hotel bills and his gas bill, fuel for his car, his food. He wasn't employed. He was completely off the books. Wasn't employed by the CIA. Wasn't employed by German Special Forces. Somebody was covering his credit card charges. So what's he do? He shows up in Fort Worth at the federal courthouse. The Texas Light Brigade, we found this out from Craig Roberts, who helped us research the film. Super guy, lives outside of Tulsa, just a wonderful guy, salt of the earth, and just one of the many, just like General Parton. We couldn't have done this movie without him. And he said that the Texas Light Brigade, which was the Texas version of the militia, and this was all good. They were on the up and up. They weren't trying to blow up buildings or anything. They were casing Strassmeyer about a month and a half before the Oklahoma City bombing happened. At 3 o'clock in the morning, he's punching a key code in the security pad in the back door of the federal courthouse in downtown Fort Worth. How in the hell does he get that information? Obviously, he's working for somebody at the federal courthouse. They gave him 24 hours to get out of Texas, where they pretty much said, look, we can't guarantee your safety anymore. Plain as day. So Strassmeyer hightails it to LOM City up in Oklahoma, which is about 20, 25 miles as the crow flies, west of the Arkansas-Oklahoma line.
What exactly is Elham City again?
It was an enclave for, again, FBI informants. It was
Yeah.
kind of the den of thieves. It was the crossroads. Guys anywhere from bank robbers that were, found Jesus or whatever. And I'm not denigrating that. That's great if you can do that. But these guys were a mixed bag of, you name it, from soup to nuts, from A to Z on as far as credibility and their background and their moral standing, and of course the head of the enclave was getting paid $500 a month by the FBI.
Yeah.
So it was really it was quite a setup there. It's similar, not the Waco compound, but they had their own thing going on. They wanted to be independent and whatnot. So McVeigh and Strassmeyer. Michael Brescia, that's who I was trying to get the name earlier. He crosses paths with them. And they're all out there Strassmeyer is supposed to be there as a director of security for a compound that didn't need any security. What the hell is this guy doing out there? He was planted there. So we found out that McVeigh was there at the same time as Strassmeyer because McVeigh was stopped over a speeding ticket about 20 miles from this compound. And he was in a Ford Esquire station wagon. I mean, the intel was just coming in. There was a briefcase in that station wagon that the governor's office wanted, and they had to petition the county sheriff that gave this ticket to get the car out of impound to get that briefcase. Well, what's McVeigh hauling the briefcase around for the governor of Oklahoma? It doesn't make any sense. So we knew these guys were working for the federal government, and both on the auspices of the U.S. as well as the German government. Strassmeyer was. And then after the bombing, he goes back to Berlin from South Carolina to Mexico City to Berlin. Wasn't even questioned by the FBI.
Now, didn't a witness at the Murrah Building identify him as possible one of the men who she saw screening?
Yes.
Okay, go into that. I think it's Jane Graham.
Jane Graham. Okay. Now, here again, one thing that we found out is there were doubles. There were two teams, at least two teams that pulled this off, because sightings of McVeigh were 10 to 12, 15, sometimes 18 minutes apart from one to the other. And
another, I guess you say, synchronicity with Lee Harvey Oswald.
Exactly, and that was another thing I pointed out at this conference in Chicago, and that's why I had these two individuals come up to me. In order to pull something like this off, and the reason there are two teams, that if all hell breaks loose and the things go south real quick, if it doesn't go off smooth, anybody that's brought up in front of the bench in the prosecution, you can discredit the witnesses. They said, well, he can't be at two places at once. It's like, okay, well, you have enough credible witnesses showing that they are at two places at once, like, bam, bingo, you got two teams working on it. I mean, it's just simple math. And sure enough, sources from OSBI, retired CIA that work for the FBI and the field office, they pulled this aside and said, this is what we do. This is what we get trained to do at Langley and at Quantico. We eat, sleep, and breathe this stuff. It happens every single day. During these operations. So here we are, a little film crew out of Oklahoma City. It's like, damn, come on, guys, really? You can't make this stuff up, as Alex Jones would say.
Well, I mean, these are people, again, these are agencies or people work for agencies that have virtually unlimited budgets, and this is their profession.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, magicians and makeup artists and special effects people work for Hollywood and also work for the intelligence agencies, and so
there's the line is certainly blurred there.
Yeah,
and I'm not trying to sensationalize this stuff. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it is what it is, and like I said, even to this day, when you asked me to do this interview, I thought, wow. So bring up some memories, and it's all good. It really is. Even though the case was tragic, I say it's good because I have the utmost respect for the people that helped us. And a lot of them had passed on since even the film was released.
But again, Jane Graham, she was a HUD employee, and a couple of days, I think it was the Friday before the bombing, I believe, she witnessed men stringing up what looked to be, based on her description, C4 explosives on the columns in the Murrah Building early one morning. And I think at that point she identified one man that looked like the description of Andre Strassmeyer.
Correct.
So I have that correct? Okay.
He was there are three levels, and we got this by way of a trusted source at the GSA office in Fort Worth. God, it's amazing who came out of the woodwork to help us with this film. He gave us 8 pages of the blueprints, 52 or 53 pages of blueprints. He could only give me 8, but one of them was the detail of the 3 levels below. There was a 3-level garage below where the Murrah Building, the physical building that we saw on the news clips. And it was on the 2nd level below that. There was a tunnel that went from that to the federal courthouse, 1 block right across the street to the south. And she was walking through that tunnel out of the garage, and she caught on the corner of her eye light green station wagon, similar to the green that you see on the Border Patrol. That's how she kept describing it to me when we were off camera getting ready for the interviews. And she said it was very odd. You don't see a car drive with that color, It's like primer gray except the light green. And sure enough, Strassmeyer gets out. He had his dark cowboy hat on and kind of disheveled-looking, 4 or 5 day shave growth, and very tall, lanky, black jeans, plaid shirt, and it was the Kinestec and Kinestec, the C4, and the looked like phone cord, and they were just looking at some type of plans and the support columns. These columns are massive, by the way, 3.5 feet in diameter, 12 1 3/8-inch rebar support. I mean, it was some heavy load-bearing columns there. And so she didn't think anything of it until after the bombing. And Jay's pretty smart. She, she's an amazing woman, and what she's done to help us is just incredible. And so we took her. She was credible. I mean, every time she'd say the story and it checked out, and we had our investigators look at it, we looked at the blueprints, it made perfect sense.
Now, we get into the area of the bombing itself.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one thing is, actually, let's get in first. We have evidence of foreknowledge. Reports of the BATF agents were warned not to come to work that day.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. And that's been confirmed.
There was a golf tournament in Shawnee, about 40 miles east of Oklahoma City on I-40, and they were there in the middle of a golf tournament. They weren't even in the building. There were 2 secretaries, I found out from some of the victims' family members. In fact, I met the daughter of one of them. Her mom was working for the Secret Service and the ATF. It was in a secretary pool. They split their time depending on the workload. And Secret Service was there. They had several agents. But the ATF wasn't. And they were notified on their pages that morning not to come into work. In fact, so much so they didn't even have their kids in the daycare. America's Kids Daycare was on the 2nd floor. 19 kids, and I believe 4 adults were killed. And there was the roster on the attendance that day at the daycare, I believe, was 15 people short of kids short of who should have been there. Well, 12 of those 15 were kids of the ATF employees. Why didn't they give notice to the other kids? It was, oh my God. I tell you what, as a side note, the first 6 months I was in Oklahoma City, just trying to get my head around this and talk to people that were relevant witnesses and sources, and all the way from former DEA agent that almost lost her life and lost her hearing in one ear to secretary at the church across the street. There was still a lot of animosity against the ATF and who told them not to bring their kids in.
And, of course, the BATF was supposedly McVeigh's main target.
Correct. Which is completely ludicrous.
Yeah. Yet there are no victims, no BATF victims.
The only qualification on it was that one secretary that was actually, she was in there doing work for the Secret Service at the time, and she did work for the ATF. Other than that, bam. It was a clean slate.
And the Department of Justice also received a phone call 20 minutes before the explosion?
That was actually, and this was by way of VZ Lawton, who was in the film, and he had passed on about 1.5 years after we released the film. Of all things, and the backstory on this is, I tell you what, there are so many backstories on this, Tim. We could go back and make a documentary just on the 5 stories within the story, but it would cost several $100,000. Anyway, let me just give you the quick and dirty on this. He was golfing in Germany, of all things, and his son is a material and logistics civilian employee over there out of Ramstein. Anyway, 2 nurses that were at Walter Reed Medical Center just happened to be there on tour, and they were struck up a conversation with VZ and said, yeah, I was in the Oklahoma City bombing. And they said, wow. He said, we got a story to tell you. Long story short, they were at Walter Reed the morning of the bombing, and they said that they were actually there. This was 2 hours before the bombing, and they got a call across their desk about let's see here. There was a certain term that was used for shockwave and blast pressure trauma treatment. And they thought, well, that's odd. Why would we get a call for that? And her superior, the doctor that she worked for, wasn't in. He was out somewhere else taking care of business. So lo and behold, the bombing happens 2 hours later. And it's like, wow, that's exactly the call we got because of a case like this. The exact same case. And then, of course, the call came in to the Justice Department, and that was another side note to that story, that it was called in 30 minutes before. Even with the time change, they figured out, we reverse engineered their phone records, and said, yeah, it came in at 8:32 a.m. Well, the bombing didn't happen until 9:02 a.m. Everything converted to Central Time. Mm-hmm. So who the hell is calling in a bomb threat 30 minutes in advance?
And why wasn't any notice sent out? That's more than enough
Well,
time. Yeah.
yeah. Well, here's the thing: there was a notice sent out. In fact, we found out Little Rock, the Capitol building security in Little Rock, those guys were they got everybody out at about 8:20 that morning, and none of that happened in Oklahoma City. Now, I do know this for a fact that the FBI field office in Oklahoma City was at Penn Place, which is about 6 miles north of where the Murrah building was. We got this by way of a radio show host and the head of the Oklahoma Radio Broadcasters Association. One time it was only on Channel 9 footage that morning, and we nailed it. And the station pulled it after that. There was a sports radio interview going on at about 8:15 that morning, local time. And remember, the bombing didn't happen until 9:02. It was a Playboy bunny, and there was some of her security detail or whatever. They just, her bodyguards. And she was in there on the air. FBI had the top 4 floors of this building. And I think it was about 28 or 29 floors. The 5th floor down, the floor below the top 4, was where this radio station was. This similar to the Howard Stern show, except more in a sports angle. And the program director and the DJ who was on there doing the interview were literally pulled out on the air live, just pulled out and said, "Get the hell out of this building right now." So, bam, the Playboy Bunny and her 2 security or bodyguards, everybody left, just literally within a moment's notice. They were live on the air. How in the world did they get a notice to get out of there a little after 8:15 that morning? Nothing was given to the people at the Murrah building. So, yes, these people knew something was up.
This is an indication that people knew something was happening, and it went out on the wire. And
that's right.
Some people didn't have complete information what was going on.
Yeah, and I did get a lot of similar stories from Highway Patrol, Oklahoma State Highway Patrol, an officer that actually showed up at the very last film festival we were at. He told me after he saw our film, he says, yeah, they got the scanner on their radios, and their cars. They can hear 12, 15 different bands coming in there, and
yeah,
they put the pieces of the puzzle together, and they knew damn well something was going to happen.
Now, another evidence of foreknowledge, or at least a strange coincidence, was Frank Keating, the then governor of Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. His brother wrote a book called The Final Jihad, years before the attack.
Yes.
What was strange about his book?
Well, the fact that there was a character named Tom McVeigh, and he was actually based in Oklahoma City, and it was a bombing of a federal building. In fact, I got to pull it out of my archives here at the office. I have to go refresh my memory. But there were three cases in that, and 2 of them I studied in detail. Of course, the Oklahoma City bombing and the downing of TWA 800. But getting back to the Oklahoma City bombing, it was Tom McVeigh, and it was a blowing up of a federal building. And as far as how the perpetrator escaped in a car very similar to what McVeigh was in, it was scripted almost. There were only a few things that were off. It was the city, I believe it was in Denver. It was based in Denver versus Oklahoma City, and the model of the car. But other than that, everything else was identical. Well, it just so happened Keating's, they came up through the Justice Department. In fact, Frank went through the Treasury Department training in the FBI training with George Bush Sr. The Keatings, their family goes way back. They were in special ops for many, many years. So, but the manuscript of the whole book was actually released I believe, in September of '94. Well, the bombing didn't happen until April of '95. So, how do you get a manuscript